Welcome to this week's episode of Kink Candid. Shay here with Jay. We are talking about a couple of topics that I think are very important tonight. I do want to let all of my listeners know that this week's episode is brought to you by, so to speak, the subreddit r/BDSM Advice. Fantastic group, some 80,000 strong, and anything you can possibly think of advice-wise, questions, everything from how do I do this particular activity safely to I've never even heard of this, what can you tell me, all in there. So come over and join us. I'm active there, as are a number of other fantastic people. So if you have any questions or information and just want a community, BDSM Advice is a good one. We are the sponsor of this week's weekly roundup, so cross-sponsoring this week with them. And we are talking a little bit about styles today, so to speak, and communication, which is a running joke at my house. I don't know if you've heard me say this one, but we have decided at my house that the answer to 99.9% of problems in lifestyle relationships is have a conversation. Communicate with your partner, please. So we'll be talking about that a little bit as well. We briefly touched previously, and I've explained to Jay here our analogy that we're using. So I'm going to explain what analogy we are using, and then we'll get into the discussion. Styles of dominance or submission, so to speak. We use the analogy here, the tie-out versus a fence versus a property line. For lack of a better term, it comes from dog training. Some dogs need to be managed by being put on a tie-out. They have a very short leash. They can, or a longer leash depending on the dog, but they can go only as far as that leash allows, and you have complete control at that point as to how much leash they have. Other dogs are not on a tie-out because they're able to be off that, but there's still a fence to keep them inside the boundaries. And other dogs are well trained enough that they know where the property line is and they can go this far but no further. So that's the analogy that we're using. We are not dogs, I promise, but it's a valid analogy, I think. So let's start with discussing our respective houses and kind of what styles we fit into, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Of course.
So you are what, a property line kind of dominant,
right?
Or do you favor the fence?
No, I most certainly favor property lines. My wife and full-time submissive knows what my rules are. She knows what I expect of her. I don't have to worry about, do I need to tell her, don't do this as soon as you walk out the house? No. She knows what I expect of her, and she knows how best to represent me and us as a couple. So I trust her implicitly that when she is in my sight, when she is out of my sight, when we are in public among others, she will represent both myself and us to the best of her ability and in the best light possible. I would argue, and it's going to sound strange to some of you, I'm sure, but I would argue that to her, what we look like and what we present to the world as a couple matters a hell of a lot more than it does to me. Simply because I have far less concern with what the world thinks of me. I was brought up not to care.
Right.
So yeah, that's my situation. And I'm sure we'll get into why that is on other episodes, but not today.
We are generally a property line style house here as well. He tends to, my husband's, my master, he tends to want a the type of service that he wants from me, the type of submission that he wants from me is that he wants to be able to establish the boundaries, establish the rules and guidelines and what he expects, the expectations, and then know without a doubt that I will operate within those. How I get to the end result is really not very important most of the time. This is what I expect, this is what I want, and how you get there really doesn't matter all that much. We talked about it, Dory and I did it in the past. We talked a little bit about the fact that for example, clothing. Both of us have expectations as to what is and is not appropriate for us to wear. The difference becomes that he doesn't pick out my clothing, for example. That's not a thing that we do at our house. It is, however, expected that you know what the expectations are and how I expect you to represent yourself and us and work within those guidelines. It's very much this is where the property line is. You know where the boundaries are. Stay within them. And that's just how he prefers to manage things. And frankly, it's the way I prefer to live. I don't want to be micromanaged in that way. So it works really, really well because I simply don't want to be micromanaged like that. I don't want someone to order my dinner for me or pick out my clothes. I don't need or want that level of micromanagement in my day-to-day life.
That would drive you bug nuts.
It really, really would, honestly. To borrow a phrase that I've seen used by my oh-so-favorite Vogon moderator over on Reddit, he knows who he is if he listens, is that he said in his day when he started, and you'll recognize this in yourself and in my history as well, when he started in this lifestyle, that submissives were, in his experience, generally feisty little fuckers who could take care of, more than capable of taking care of themselves.
Of course. If you weren't, why would we want you?
This is precisely his philosophy on the matter here, is like, he tells me that he absolutely expects and requires that I be, in his words, a fully functioning human.
Yes.
Like all by myself. And so that is how we choose to manage it. Now, Munchkin, who has my other co-host on the show, will tell you that she is very much a tie-out kind of girl. She and I talked openly about the fact that while I adore her husband as a friend, he is a wonderful person in many, many, many ways, he would make an absolutely terrible match for me. He is a micromanagement kind of dom. He must
have much more time in his day than I do.
This was his philosophy at my house too. He was like, I don't know how he has time to do that, to be honest with you, but he wants to be able to dictate, this is what you're allowed to eat today. This is what you're allowed to wear. This is, what color your nails may be. Those levels of things. And it's very comforting to her, to Munchkin. And he enjoys having that level of control, and she enjoys giving him that level of control. But it's a very, very different style, honestly.
Yeah. I want to make it clear here. I think it's important that I make it clear, because I may be coming off as harsh, and I don't mean to. I know and adore Munchkin. We've talked several times. She knows quite a bit about me, a lot through you, but also through our own conversations. And I adore Munchkin. I don't know her master as well, and so that's not a thing that I feel comfortable speaking on, but I adore Munchkin, and I'm glad that she's found somebody who can make her happy in the way that she needs to. I'm also very glad that it wasn't me, because I don't have the kind of patience it would take to be the master that she needs. That's not within my purview. I will fully admit that her master is a much mightier man than I am where that is concerned.
she, in the same conversation that she and I had, where we ascertained that her master would make a terrible master for me because he wants a level of micromanaging that I simply do not, I would chafe under very much so. She also recognizes that while she knows my husband, my master, she knows him quite well. They're friends because she's my best friend, obviously, and she knows him well. And she loves him as a person. She really does. However, she will also tell you that she would be miserable in his collar because the way that he wants to manage life would make her miserable. It really would. And that's
she would feel neglected. She would feel neglected and ignored.
She really would. And because she wants someone to tell her, yes, you may wear that, no, you may not. And that makes her happy, and it makes her master happy. It would make me and my master absolutely miserable. He wants to be able to look at me and be able to say, you know what's allowed and what isn't. I don't need to tell you every single day what you are and aren't allowed to wear. You know what the rules are. That's just how we kind of manage it.
I would say that I enjoy even less control than that, in that whereas your master gives you guidelines as to this is what you are allowed to buy. If you're allowed to buy it, you're allowed to wear it. I honestly don't care. And much less now than even I used to, because my wife and Slave is going through some long-term health issues. And so our philosophy is, if it is comfortable and if she can get herself in and out of it in a day safely, then this is what she's allowed to wear. Beyond that, I don't care. I don't want to care. As long as she is able to dress and to function and to be well and happy in a day, I am ecstatic.
Generally, the most common guidelines as far as clothing go at my house, for example, are if it is appropriate for the setting and the weather, I am generally allowed to wear it. By which I mean,
I don't have to go that far, because my girl, she's lived in Florida much longer than I have. And I've lived here for quite a bit of my life at this point, but she's lived in Florida much longer than I have, and has a much better grasp on, I would say, an almost instinctive grasp of, is it going to rain later? Do I need to be prepared for that? Or is it going to be hot and nasty all day? It's going to be hot and nasty all day. I'm putting on shorts and a tank top, and that's just it.
And so he, and Munchkin, she likes, as an example, chores. That's a good one too. A good example of this sort of thing. And there is a middle ground in what we refer to as the fence style, which is and neither of us practice that particular style, but I have known people that do. And it exists sort of in the middle, in a more middle ground, wherein some things are micromanaged, but other things aren't.
Right.
I know, I've known girls that where the situation was that the chores had been explained a long time ago, and they knew exactly what the expectations were as far as that goes, but their partner still picks out their clothing every day. And that sort of, blending of the two is also a thing that exists. I can't speak to it on a personal level, but I have known people that practice in that way. So that is an option that is out there. But chores are a very good example of how these styles differ. I know at my house what chores need to be done and when they need to be done. So some things need to be done daily, some things need to be done a couple times a week, some things weekly, etc. I know exactly what they are and what needs to be done and on what schedule. And I know what things are expected of me as an individual and what things are not. And so he doesn't want to have to tell me, did you make sure that this chore got done today? Because his philosophy is, you know that that's the chore, and you know it needs to be done today, so I just expect that it will be done. This is how he works. And whereas Munchkin is much more today your chores are this, this, and this. Make sure these things get done today. And she and her master prefer to manage their home that way, and that's valid, but it doesn't work at my house. Now, there are additional tasks that are not on my daily or weekly list that are extra that come up. Then those are things he'll mention to me. But the day-to-day, keep the house running kind of thing, his philosophy is, you know what needs to be done, make sure it's done. It helps to have a teenager in the house because I can defer a certain number of tasks to, I can assign out certain number of tasks.
You know which tasks need to be done in a day. You know which tasks he expects you to handle personally, and you know which tasks are suitable to delegate.
Some things get delegated to the child, some things get delegated to the teenager, some things are mine. But he doesn't expect to have to tell me that on a day-to-day basis. And I know you and your girl very well. And that isn't, unless things have drastically changed at your house very recently, that's how it works at your house too.
Oh yeah.
With the caveat
those of you who have read more than one of the Gore novels, and I shudder to actually bring it up, but I will because it's the best way to illustrate what goes on at my house. Those of you who have read more than one will know what I mean when I say wagon trains. That's the style in my house. I expect my girls to simply handle it. I don't need to tell them this need to be done. They have a better grasp of what needs to be done in the house, usually, than I do. I make sure that the rent gets paid. I make sure that the water gets paid. I check and make sure that the electric gets paid, although that is no longer, that particular bill is no longer my responsibility. Beyond that, the girls pretty much run the day-to-day operation of the house by either handling things themselves or delegating them to the various demon spawn that populate my home. They don't need me to tell them, and if I tried to tell them, they would get angry at me, and the quality of my meals would then suffer.
I joke, but to a very real degree, and I think this is true for a lot of 24/7 couples. At my house, he has a responsibility when it comes to me, because that is part of the power exchange. And he fully recognizes and understands that responsibility. He has certain responsibilities in his role, and that's something that he takes on voluntarily. But I am every bit as essential to his day-to-day life as he is to mine. And one of the things that he needs from me is that level of knowing that he can depend on the fact that I will handle what needs to be handled.
He needs to know that when he walks out the door in the morning to go to work or to handle whatever tasks he has to handle during the day, that while he is gone and when he gets home, the house will still be standing, the children will still be alive, dressed is preferable, undamaged is also preferable, although not necessarily always possible. But he needs to know that he can go off and handle what needs to be handled, and you will be at home taking care of things and making sure that when he gets home there is a meal, clean clothes. Clean dishes are usually preferable, but
we can manage if the dishes
don't get washed eventually.
But preferably daily, but from a cleanliness roach standpoint, it is generally preferable that they get done daily. But that doesn't always happen. And I do want to mention in passing, and there will be a future episode on this topic, but the caveat that we deal with some health issues here as well. I have some chronic health issues. I am also recently recovering from a surgery, and those things factor in when one is 24/7 and one's expectations have to be worked around the reality.
Yes.
There's an expectation and there's the fantasy of what 24/7 would look like, and then there is the reality of what it actually looks like. And that reality, it changes. I am generally expected to make sure that food is cooked and dishes are done on a day-to-day basis. However, I was in the hospital for a couple of days, and then when I got back, I was not moving very well for several more days. And those expectations, they change and are adjusted, and that's normal and good. But, it does have to be taken into account what one is capable of doing on any given moment.
Versus what one's master would like to happen.
Right. He might like me to cook a 3-course meal. He would probably enjoy the 3-course meal, but he is not irrational or unreasonable and understands that your girl that just got home from the hospital after having surgery is probably not capable of cooking the 3-course meal at this moment. There's not a thing that can be done at this time. And so if the dishes don't get done because, and that's the key thing to remember in these situations, especially with the property line style, is that if the dishes don't get done because I am physically incapable of doing the dishes at that moment because of various health issues, that is one thing, and it is very different to a situation where the dishes do not get done because I simply decided to lose my brain for a day and decided, you know what, I'm just not going to do them. That is not a thing that happens at my house, for the record, listeners, but if I somehow decided one day, I just don't feel like doing the dishes, that is a different situation. And so I've heard the style that we engage in at our house referred to today, actually, as a decentralized command style also, which
That's
is
reasonable.
Is a reasonable analogy, and it was explained by the person who used that terminology to mean he gives her the desired end result and then gives her the ability to choose the most appropriate and effective way to reach that result.
Yeah.
And I think that's really kind of what we're talking about when we talk about the property line style is this is what I expect, this is what I want, this is the end result. Figure out how to get there. You're smart, you're capable, you manage how to get there. He does not tell me how to manage the house, generally speaking. I'll be honest with you. He will tell you that I manage a lot of everything and keeping the house running. And that is my job in this relationship. And generally speaking, as you said, he does not generally tell me how to do it because I am more than capable of figuring out how to do it all by myself. I don't really need any help. I'm good. Let me do it. And that is the key difference. And I think that's the difference between it and the more fence style is the fence style takes a little more interest in how.
Whereas we assume, being property line doms that we are, we assume that you know how, or we'll figure it out. As long as we tell you, this is what I expect. I don't care how it gets there, just get it there. I'm not your algebra teacher. I don't need you to show your work.
Yeah, I'm laughing simply because that is an analogy that he used when we were discussing this topic between the two of us.
Oh, Lord.
The showing your work analogy was one that came up in my house, too. And I want to take this moment to let my listeners know that he is absolutely involved in the production of our little episodes here. He does not choose to host with me, and I know that is a little bit unusual for a show of this type. But and it never occurred to me to mention it before, but it's probably relevant. He does not host with me simply because of the nature of our dynamic. I naturally, because of the nature of the dynamic that we live in, would tend to defer to him. And he has stated in no uncertain terms that while he would be happy to guest and host on an episode or two with me if his input is particularly relevant to a situation, he doesn't want to risk wresting creative control away from me without meaning to. And that's a concern that he has had. He's going, I have an authority when it comes to you that if I were to do that, it would run the risk of me inadvertently taking control away from you. And I think your voice is important, and I don't want to take that.
Wise decision.
Which is why he's not usually on the show. But when topics come up, I bounce ideas off him on a regular basis because that's how we work. And I kind of discuss with him and get his thoughts and perspective on things before I come up with my thoughts for any given episode of the show. And so that's, his voice is being heard, but it's being heard through me in that way. Which does bring me to the secondary point that I wanted to kind of bring up in this episode, and that is communication. And it's relevant simply because any of these styles, and in particular, in my opinion, the property line style, requires very clear and effective and intentional communication. If he does not communicate his expectations, I cannot be reasonably expected to meet them.
No. There have been a few times in my house where I will look at my wife and go, why wasn't this done? And the answer invariably is because you didn't tell me that was what you wanted me to do. You may have assumed that I understood this, but this was a failure on your part because you failed to, on my part specifically, because I failed to communicate effectively my desire to have this or that. And so, of course, she's not a mind reader, and the failing in such instances is inevitably mine. And I'll cop to that.
It is imperative, I think, in these situations for both parties to communicate, but in different ways. And I say that because as dominants, you guys are required for the relationship to be effective and to be healthy. It is imperative and required that you guys communicate very clearly and effectively what your expectations are. We are not mind readers, as you say. We don't know that you want this or that if you do not tell us that you want this or that, because it varies a lot. Even here, you'll hear us talk on this episode. You're hearing two people that are in long-term committed 24/7 relationships. And you're hearing two people who live in not only 24/7 relationships, but with a similar style of dominance and submission in that both houses are property line houses. But even between the two of us, you're going to hear very different things. The way that you work with your girls and the way that he works with me are similar, yes, but not identical.
No.
His expectations for me are not going to be identical to your expectations for your girl. It's a different thing.
He expects that you have the gym bag ready when he's ready to go to the gym. If I handed my wife a gym bag, and it would be, what, you want cookies?
Because
snacks, sodas, what?
what is it you want me to put in this bag? I don't understand. And and so he has those expectations of me because they're relevant to him and to our home and our situation. And so because he's a different person than you, and because I'm a different person than her, the expectations are in fact different. We live in different states. That's another example. What is appropriate clothing where I live is not necessarily appropriate clothing where you live.
No.
We live in Colorado. Our temperatures are quite different to Florida. And consequently, the expectation of what I will and will not wear is going to differ a little bit based on the fact that I live in a place where it's a different thing. And so, that's a different expectation. We have different dietary needs or shopping schedules, things like that. These expectations differ because our lives differ. You are a property line dom, and so is he, but we're different homes and different people, and we're different people, and so we don't manage our home exactly the same way.
No.
And that's the thing and that's why communication becomes so important, because if I were to assume that the expectations at my house were the same as the expectations at your house, that would be problematic.
Or in Munchkin's house.
Exactly. If I made the assumption that he wants the same things that you want or that Munchkin's master wants, then I'm going to be meeting his expectations. And if he doesn't tell me, I have to assume. So it's vitally important that he tell me exactly what it is he does and does not expect. Not on a daily basis in my house, but he does have to communicate it.
Yeah.
But, and this is the point that I wanted to kind of get to, is we talk a lot these days. And I say these days, I sound like an old woman, I know, but I have been doing this. Munchkin and I talked about in the very first episode, we collectively have some 30 some odd years of experience between the two of us. It's a little insane. We've been doing this a very long time. And like any community, like anything, like any entity, what BDSM and kink looks like in the world at large does shift and change over time. And that's normal, but it leads to me saying things like these days or when I started. I sound like a crotchety old lady, but that's where we are.
In my day.
Yeah, I have actually uttered that phrase not that long ago. And so that's the thing. But it is relevant to the conversation. I think there's a lot of conversations currently going on in the world at large. I am very active on social media, primarily over on Reddit, but I have a presence on multiple social media platforms. In fact, my master teases me about it because he says I live there. He does not social media, you guys, like hardly at all. And so it's a thing.
Well, he has a Facebook account. I don't know that he uses it, but I know that it is there.
I had to update his settings the other day. He is terrible at social media. I feel like he's
right.
Really
okay.
yeah, he doesn't do much social media. I'm the social media maven at our house, and so I have a presence on there. So I am privy to a slice, a look at what is going on in the quote unquote community at large, as it relates to the lifestyle and all things kinky. And I see a lot of conversations about the importance of dominance communicating and having conversations and initiating conversations, asking about limits, asking about boundaries, communicating expectations, all of those things. And I in no way mean to take away from that. That's the reason I brought up the dominance first, because I don't mean to take away from that, because it is incredibly important that that be a thing. However, and this is where I become slightly less popular, but, you know, that's where we are.
If you were popular all the time, I'd have to call you Buffy. So
see, there you go.
Get on with
and
it.
I don't want to be Buffy. I want to be Shay. But it is equally as vital and equally as much a responsibility. It is a responsibility of dominants to communicate with their submissives, to communicate about boundaries and limits and expectations and all of those things. These are critically important discussions that dominants are responsible for having. So let's be very clear about that. However, it is also vitally important, and it's equally a responsibility of the submissive to also initiate and continue those communications. We are not mind readers and do not know what our dominants expect of us. However, they don't know either.
No.
I have to tell him.
My girl. Okay, go. Say something.
I have to tell him if I'm having a problem, whether that be mental or physical or emotional, if anything has changed, if my abilities have changed, if my needs have changed. I am required to tell him these things, because he cannot work within those guidelines, that framework, if I'm not communicating it to him.
No.
And you, as well, are dealing, you know, we've spoken a couple times sort of obliquely in this episode about health issues. You, I am sure, would expect that your girl would communicate to you her physical abilities and needs at any given moment.
Right, and these tend to change from day to day. You'll often hear in my house, what's your pain level today? How are you walking today? And sometimes the answer is I can do this, I'm doing fine. And sometimes the answer is no. I'm going to sit here and veg to Netflix. Okay, you do that, and I will, between the children and I, we will take care of the rest. Because at that point, her responsibility shifts from taking care of the house and taking care of the kids and this and that to getting better. That is the prime goal at that point. And it is my job to make sure that everything else is handled while she's busy getting better.
And I hear these stories, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this particular episode with me in especially on this one is I hear a lot of talk, and it came up again today over on Reddit about dominance pushing boundaries or not respecting boundaries and it was in the context of not having had a conversation about it. Now, I know that at my house, no matter how many years we have been together, we are absolutely still having these conversations.
Of course.
And I know that I sometimes am the one initiating those conversations. And I would assume it probably works similarly at your house.
Yes. They are... they're mutual responsibilities, I would say.
Let's, as an example, now we've talked openly on the show several times about the fact that we do not, as 24/7 lifestyle at my house, it is quite rare at my house, honestly, to have what much of the larger community would refer to as a scene, per se.
No.
It doesn't happen very often here, honestly. It really doesn't. And that is not that is not a complaint. Let's be honest. I'm not suggesting that that's a bad thing. It's just the natural progression of the way that this sort of has shifted and grown over the years. That doesn't happen very often at my house. But that's not to say that it never happens. It just isn't an all the time kind of thing. And we do still experiment with new things. And if a new thing has been brought to my attention or his, either one of us is capable and expected to say, I am curious about X thing. Let's talk about it. How do you feel about X thing? Are you interested in this thing? Is this the thing that you want to do? And how, and I can bring that up just as easily as he can.
Right. With us, one or the other of us will find, for lack of a better term, technology, furniture or devices that seem interesting or seem as if they would better facilitate our lifestyle. And then it's inevitably it takes the form of one or the other, copying and pasting a URL, a web link into the ever-present open message box. And go, what do you think? Is this the thing we want to investigate further or try? Do you think we should? And then we will have a conversation, either aloud when that's a thing, or if it's not a thing, then we will type back and forth, because her computer is in a slightly different location in the house than mine is. So but one way or the other, there will be a conversation of whatever strikes, and we will make the decision together. Is this the thing we're interested in trying, or is it not? And we go from there. Is this the thing we're interested in trying? Do more research. Do more research. Okay. Is this the thing we can afford? And the answer is yes, no, or further down the road. In which case we save up money for whatever it is, and then the purchase is made, and weeks down the road, the package at the door. But without the conversation, without the communication, no package, no. Or let's take it the other way. Without the conversation, the package shows up at the door, and then the other in the relationship is going, okay, what is this thing, and where did the money go that I needed for this other thing? If you don't communicate, then
it's going to lead to issues.
Yeah.
And yeah, I see a lot of conversations about, why would this Dom do this thing without conversing and discussing it with the submissive? And that is a fair question, because that is not something that in my opinion, a dominant of any quality should do. If he wants to try a new thing that we haven't done before, he's not going to simply surprise me with a new thing and just, go right into it. That's not appropriate. And so he's going to say, okay, I've been reading about blah, let's talk about it, and how do you feel about it? But at the same time, if for some reason I want to try a new thing, it is then incumbent upon me to say, hey, I read about this thing. Would you be interested in trying that for us at some point? And that's a thing that we can discuss and deal with. And the other thing that comes up is if for some reason we talk a lot about sort of hypotheticals. Let's go with the hypothetical. Let's assume that for whatever reason you or he were to forget that one should have a conversation about these. Now, that is unlikely to occur with either of you, but let's assume for the purposes of discussion that somehow this is the thing that happened.
Right. We have entered the world of make-believe.
Right. We're in make-believe world. We've taken the train like on Mr. Rogers, and now we're in the fantasy. We're now in the land of make-believe.
I am so glad that you. I am so glad that you caught that particular brainwave. Thank you.
We have taken the train, and now we're in the land of make-believe, and we're on Mr. Rogers' show. We're gonna be in make-believe land for a few minutes. Let's assume that either one of you completely forgot all the rules and boundaries that have been set up to make this a safe and healthy thing, and decided that you wanted to surprise me or your girl with this new thing that you wanted to do. If you try this thing and have not discussed it with me, he tries this thing and he's like, you know what, I'm going to try it. I then have not only the right, but arguably the responsibility to tell him, hey, whoa. This is not a thing we talked about, and I am not comfortable with this.
Yeah, no.
And I would not hesitate to do so in that situation, because we both understand that communication has to go both ways. We submissives, we have words too, and we can use them, and we can talk about what we're feeling, and we
not only can but should.
We have a responsibility to ourselves and to our partners to communicate effectively as much as they do. This is not a one-sided kind of thing. It can't be. We at my house refer to it as symbiotic.
That's
what I do.
Fair assessment, yes.
What I do depends intrinsically upon what he does, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so that's something I wanted to kind of put out there to maybe the newer or greener submissives that are listening. You have the right and the responsibility to communicate effectively with anyone that you are playing with, in or out of a relationship. And you are able and encouraged to refuse to proceed in a situation where someone is not respecting that right.
If you need encouragement, accept this as that encouragement. We give you that permission if you so need it. Please do.
And if you are talking to a new potential partner, and this goes for both sides of the slash, if you're talking to a new potential partner, if they don't initiate the conversation about what is and isn't on the table and what is and isn't allowed and okay, if they don't, you should.
Yeah. There's a reason that the opening rules, the laws of robotics, if we will, stay sane, consensual. In my house, it's safe, sane, sober, and consensual. That's because there's often medication involved on both sides. And if for some reason medication is going funky, then safety is at risk and we don't play. But if you aren't communicating, if your dominant is not communicating with you, if your submissive is not communicating with you, then it is not a safe environment. Please be safe.
We are at my house, and this is another future episode that I wanted to kind of promo to our listeners. We are at my house a rack rather than SSC at my house. We live by rack rather than SSC. And rack, for those who are unaware, is a slightly less popular terminology, but I like it better myself personally. RAC stands for Risk Aware Consensual Kink. And by that, and the reason that I like it more is because in my mind, there are certain things that we do at my house that are not ever going to be 100% safe. And arguably are sane, but it depends on who you ask. But we use RAC here simply because it refers a lot to the responsibility on both parties to do a lot of research and be very aware before we step into anything new. When we have a violet wand, and when we got the violet wand, actually before we got the violet wand, we talked a lot about whether or not we wanted to get one, and how we both spoke about it. And then once it arrived, there was even further researching of how do we use the wand safely? Is this safe? Is that safe? What are the risks, and how do I avoid them? So be safe, be aware of the risks, and if they're not communicating, then you have two options. One, initiate the conversation, because it may be not that they are a bad person or don't want to communicate, but simply they have had a moment and had a brain lapse and have not initiated the conversation, in which case you are absolutely capable of initiating it and should initiate it.
That's not necessarily fair. There is another possibility. Not that they've had a brain lapse, but that they simply don't know how to bring up the subject that they wish to broach.
That is a good point. That is a very good point.
Submissives aren't the only ones who are new to this lifestyle. There are new doms, just as there are new submissives.
And if they don't know how to bring it up or forget to bring it up or what have you, you are absolutely capable, even as a submissive, of saying, hey, we haven't talked about boundaries. We haven't talked about limits. Can we have that conversation? If they are unwilling to have the conversation, that is a whole other issue. But
oh, yeah.
You don't have to wait for them to do it. You can bring it up on your own and say, hey, we never talked about this. Let's talk about it.
And as she says, if they're unwilling, do not pass go. Advance very quickly in the opposite direction.
Advance to the rear very quickly, and do not pass go, do not collect $200. That is I rarely use the term red flag, but someone who is unwilling to have a conversation about limits and boundaries is not someone you should be playing with.
Now, see, I was steering away from that term to save your sanity, and you went there anyway.
Yeah, because I generally don't like it. But that is one of the few that actually is, in my opinion, a true concerning red flag is someone who's unwilling to have that conversation. Someone who forgot to have the conversation or wasn't sure how to have the conversation may or may not be an appropriate partner. But someone who's unwilling never is.
No.
And this is where it becomes important to really get to know each other before you leap into things, but that's another episode. So next week and the week after, the next two episodes, I kind of want to, and you listeners are getting privy to a certain amount of inner workings of Kink Candid right now. I want to kind of talk a little bit about the management of health and disability in these situations, because that's a very relevant factor. I've seen it come up, people talking about how the dynamic changes when one is dealing with a health issue, whether that be a chronic health issue or a permanent disability, or whether we're talking about something temporary like a surgical recovery. But I've seen that asked, and I think we have some insight to share on that, and I do want to touch on that a little bit.
I would agree.
And then I would like to invite you to join in with a discussion with me about safety.
Certainly.
And the ways that we manage safety concerns. And how that kind of works. We are going to do an episode. I am formulating my thoughts, dear listeners, on the concept of brat and what is and is not a brat, and the definition of submission. That is an episode that is coming up. It may or may not be a slightly controversial episode, but I think it needs to happen.
I would agree.
So I think that's about the next 3 weeks that I want to kind of throw out there. We're going to talk a little bit about health and disability and accessible kink and managing health issues in kink, and then we're going to do an entire episode devoted entirely to safety and how that can be managed effectively. Some of the ways that I manage safety, some of the ways that you do, and some of the concerns that kind of come up in that way. And so that's kind of where we are on the show going forward.
Yeah.
So tune in next week, and you will get to hear us talk about health and disability and accessible kink. I think accessible kink is going to be a huge issue that people won't talk about.
And I'll be right here with you.